Being a social personality and political psychologist that studies left right ideology and the American culture war, I've been asked to reflect on what's next. What's next for us as a country and as a community. So, with a fraught and contentious 2020 presidential election concluding amid a global pandemic, it's apparent that the country finds itself even further polarized across lines of difference. It's total war all the time. I think what's particularly striking about our present situation is that nations usually tend to come together in times of collective crisis. Psychologists have been studying this for a while, and it's often referred to as the rally around the flag phenomenon. And as those of us old enough to remember know, the U.S. experienced a period of incredible unity following the tragic events of 9/11. But that doesn't really seem to happen much anymore. One reason probably contributed to what's going on right now is the election was so salient and a very important election. But just generally speaking, when we've had two sort of events happen, and whether it be a hurricane or some other tragic event, there really isn't even a brief temporary period of unity. It's just an excuse to hurl insults and blame across the aisle. So when the COVID-19 pandemic emerged last spring, I was thinking about what would happen, and I was actually frequently asked by people if we would see Americans come together or not. Would we put aside our differences for the common good? Obviously, as I noted, that didn't happen. Rather, the crisis seems to have intensified the culture war between the left and right, and it's spilling into nearly every aspect of human life. There used to be places where we could take refuge in areas that were non-political or politics didn't really come into, but those spaces are disappearing where everything's political all the time. So why can't we get along? And why does cooperation seem so impossible? And when I think about this, I tend to think about, if we can't find a way to disagree constructively, then I worry that our democracy is in danger, because that is essential for it to happen. So a lot of research indicates that a big part of the problem is that we're losing a sense of shared reality, that we're not tracking the same sets of facts or the same stories, that there are different split screens that we're tuning into that are just completely disconnected to each other. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives are increasingly living in separate worlds with distinct moral cultures, segregated by city blocks, geographic regions, businesses people frequent, particularly pernicious different news sources that selectively report on things of their interest or that fit certain preconceived notions, and also social media networks that are increasingly homogenous with people's politics. So actually, we're seeing this play out right now, though, with regard to part of the country convincing itself that there is a massive voter fraud conspiracy. But essentially, what the problem is, what we've been doing, and are more we're increasing, escalating, is we're siloing ourselves into politically homogenous echo chambers. And the problem with this is that it fosters overconfidence, it fosters self-righteousness, and intolerance of different viewpoints. When we all share the same blind spots, we can make some pretty egregious errors. So it's good to break out of complete homogeneity and have different perspectives to bring into the conversations. And while it's human nature to be attracted and seek out like-minded others, breaking away from this proclivity is a really important step in reducing our political division and animosity, for turning down the temperature. It's how we check our confirmation bias and guard against motivated reasoning. It's how we create mutual understanding and trust. The schema of us versus them is really unhelpful, although it's been ingrained within a lot of people. No one really holds their political views because they are evil or deliberately evil. Rather, they tend to do evil things because they think they are doing something good. They believe they have some sort of righteous cause that justifies some evil or bad actions. And psychologists have studied this too, and often refer to this as the myth of pure evil, that it's not really the reason why people do things, that they often acknowledge that maybe they have to do some nasty things, but it's towards some greater good that justifies the means. So evil is not really the motivation for people. this passive tendency for people to think the worst possible reason someone could have for holding a different opinion or viewpoint is the only possible reason. So we attribute the worst reason people could have for thinking differently about an issue or being on the other side of an issue. And one of the reasons why tends to be is that the mind anchors on its own reasons. You have your own reasons for being on one side of a particular issue, and therefore mistakenly assume that other people must be against the values that guide you. When in reality, people are often operating from different values or priorities than yours. And it's often not that they disagree or they're against your values. They just might set them up a little bit differently in a particular context. But now we're seeing a generation that knows nothing but intense fighting between the left and the right. And while Democrats or Republicans have never liked each other, it's moved into an intense antipathy. It's hatred across the aisle. So I would encourage people to be curious about those with different politics, to extend the principle of charity and appeal to our common humanity. It doesn't do us good to be sort of fractured into warring groups. Instead, what I encourage people to do is to think of themselves as in terms of our common humanity. Draw a larger circle that encompasses all of us, and people will think differently about the issues. And respectively engage with those you disagree with. Challenge people if you disagree with them, but do it respectfully. Avoid accusations of malevolence or character insults, and usually you'll find that is returned. But what we really need to do is break out of these echo chambers and interact with people that see the world a bit differently than us.